Welcome to English 1120 at SUU. This week we're going to talk about Middle English. So I want to give you a quick overview of why learning about Middle English is relevant to our study of grammar. And the first thing that we want to give an overview is the time frame. When did Middle English happen? What are the changes or the differences between Old English and Middle English? And then what kind of language borrowing and language contact was occurring during this time? So Middle English, we would generally consider this to be somewhere around the 11th century. So the late 10 something is what we consider the Norman invasion. Normans came from northern France. Now we call that region Normandy. Okay, and this is a group who came, traveled across the English Channel and started to conquer England or the Anglo-Saxons. And because of that, they enforced a lot of their language on the people who were already living there. And there was lots of language contact then, back and forth between groups that we now think of as France and groups that we now think of as the British Isles throughout that time. We generally think of the end of Middle English and then the start of what we call modern English, especially early modern English, to be around the 15th century. And this is with the invention of printing, standardization that has now come to England and is being used. And so we start seeing some shifts then in the language. So really, this middle period, 11th century to 15th century, is what we would consider Middle English. So how does Middle English differ from what we had before with Old English? One is it's becoming more simplified in terms of its morphology. So the language is more analytic. We're seeing less inflections in words, and word order, therefore, is becoming more important and more strict, less flexibility in moving words around. We start seeing a little bit more standardization. What we think of as Old English is really just a collection of lots of different languages or dialects of this Old English. And although there's certainly many dialects of Middle English, we're starting to see a little more standardization and regional dialects. We're also starting to see in the written form of the language silent letters appearing. And silent letters weren't just added there for fun. These were words that had those pronounced letters, but over time the pronunciation has dropped them and the written language has kept them. So things like the silent E at the end of words. Those were vowel sounds that were pronounced. We dropped them now. Okay. Let's talk about the influence of other languages. Scandinavian languages of the Nordic people, Vikings, okay, who would come to the British Isles, settle colonies, also intermarry with people. So we're seeing some influence of that language, primarily in things like verbs and nouns, but rare. It's rare that we see borrowing of what we would consider the function class words, but even pronouns in English, some of them have come from Scandinavia. And it's probably because the two languages were related to the same Germanic language in the past, and that's why there was more easily allowing things like function class words to be borrowed between those. French, on the other hand, not as closely related to English, but the Normans brought a lot of French words with them, and those have been moved into English. It's interesting to keep in mind here that this influence of French is different from later influences from French. This is the Norman French that becomes influenced. So words, for instance, war, that has come into English actually from Norman French is related to another French word like guerre, like guerrilla. So like guerrilla fighters, okay? That's related to the word war in Old French, but because they entered the English language at different times, the pronunciation and spelling of those words is very different. But they're both words that have been borrowed into English from French. So English has been influenced by other languages, including these language groups. So the big question we need to leave with our discussion of Middle English is, so what? Why do we care about this? How does it relate to our study of English grammar? And the first thing is that helps us understand that English has changed over time. And the English will continue to change over time. And this is a normal part of language. And the English was influenced by other languages. There are some people who try to get back to kind of pure English. This is a ridiculous notion because English has always been influenced by others. Even before it was the language of the Anglos, it had been influenced by other languages and came from other languages. So pure English is kind of a silly notion. And the English today is not bad if it's borrowing words from other languages. And other languages aren't bad because they borrowed from English. And that there was never one real English or one true English. English has always had a variety of dialects that are part of this language group or language family. And that's true today. We have many different varieties of English, and all those varieties, there is no one variety that is better than another. They're just all different, and that they serve different groups in different ways. So that's our big takeaways and why studying Old English, Middle English, and as next week, early modern matters, because it's helping us understand how English is changing and how it's used by so many different groups in different ways. All right, so we learned a little bit about the time frame, what we would call Middle English, 11th to 15th century. We talk about some of the changes or differences between Old English and Middle English, and then we talked about how even at that time, Middle English was being influenced and borrowing from other languages.